questioning is perhaps the greatest gift we have as human beings.
Science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking.
It's a way of thinking that teaches us to question everything we think we know.
Science came about by developing techniques, methodologies for gaining reliable knowledge about the world.
We have at our fingertips the technologies that were only possible for the largest governments and corporations 20 years ago as an individual today.
If human civilization continued at anything remotely like the current pace of technology advancement for 1 million years, where would we be? I think we're either extinct or on a lot of planets.
The good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it.
We hold the scientific method in high regard because it works. If it stopped working, we'd throw it out.
Discover the past.
Create the future.
This is the Here and How podcast.
Welcome to the Here and How podcast, where every week we dive deep into big ideas, exploring the past so we can create the future. My name is Rachel Oates, and this is episode 3, What Makes You, You. Today we are talking all about identity and personality and how we describe who we are and what we are and just a sense of self, to be honest. I am joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Stephen Woodford.
Hello.
And Thomas Westbrook.
Hey.
So, let's pretend you guys are meeting someone new for the first time, someone who has never seen you, never heard of you, never met you before. How do you describe yourself?
Right then. You want to take this one, Thomas?
No pressure, you know.
I say, hi, I'm Steve, I'm a Gemini.
Not how do you impress the ladies.
Most people start with like their profession or their occupation, which really isn't who you are. It's more like what you do. And it's kind of boring too, but you know.
But it always is, isn't it? When you meet somebody, it's always like, oh, how's the weather? No one cares. But this is a great icebreaker.
Yeah, small talk.
Yeah.
I love the idea. There was this guy who did a TED talk on how when he introduces himself like a child. He'll be like, I'm so-and-so, and I really love, scuba diving, or I love playing with Legos, and, like, my favorite thing in the whole world is peanut butter ice cream.
That's cute.
And it just makes for a more interesting conversation starter.
I mean, they say that first impressions matter, and, like, you could be, like, this scientist and this really intelligent, philosophical person that can give you deep insights, and when somebody goes, who are you? You go, oh, I like the colour blue. Like, just giving that across. Brilliant.
So this is really interesting, because you guys are talking about, like, profession and personality traits and your interests and stuff, but neither one of you thought to kind of say, well, I'm a Homo sapiens, or I'm a human being, or, like, describe your height, or that you're made up of cells, or something. Because, like...
I guess I could introduce myself.
But these are things that they can see immediately, and things that we all share in common.
Assuming you're in front of them. Like...
Not necessarily. We've all seen Men in Black, right?
That's true. But, like, the physical building blocks that kind of, like, make up who we are and, like, what's behind us, the biology, the chemistry, we just kind of assume it's the same as everyone else, right? But it's not, because it's kind of this physiological differences, no matter how subtle, that make us individuals. So, we wouldn't have the kind of psychological or sociological differences without the physiological ones to start with, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of what I want to focus on today. I want to start by looking at, like, the biology of how and why we're different, and then looking at the psychology, and then the sociology behind what makes you, you, and how we come up with our identities, and, do we decide our own identities? Are they genetic? Are they decided for us? Do other people ascribe them? And lots of things like that. So I guess throughout today's episode, the kind of main questions I want to kind of keep coming back to are we defined by the physical structure that makes us up? Or how about our personalities, our thoughts, how we view the world around us? Does that dictate our identity? Or are we defined by the rest of society and how other people see us and where our place is in the world? Or rather, what mix of these factors affect what make us us? Do you think that's a kind of fair place to start?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's lots to uncover there. I'm excited.
Okay, brilliant.
Seems like a little bit of all of the above, but I'm fascinated to dive into this.
I think the great thing about this topic is that there's no right or wrong answer. Everything's going to be different for everyone, so kind of the points of view that we have are going to be very different depending on who we are and how we were brought up and where we were brought up and things like that. But to start with, I want to kind of like address the biology and the physiology behind who we are and our identities. So, opening little question for you guys, little quiz. If we don't include all the microbes living in us and on us, how many cells are there estimated to be in the average human body?
4.
5. Am I closer?
Ooh. Well.
You would, sir, you would.
You are a little bit closer.
Yes!
No, but seriously, do you guys have any rough ideas?
I haven't a clue. I know that there's so many cells, but I know that a lot of us...
Billion? Trillion?
So if I tell you that there are approximately 2 billion heart muscle cells and 50 billion fat cells, can you estimate the kind of whole body from that?
Without the organisms.
8 trillion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you have more skin cells than anything else, right?
I think so, yeah.
6 trillion.
6 trillion. Anything different, Stephen?
I haven't a clue. I'm so out my depth here. So in that case, I'll go for 6.9 trillion.
Well, Stephen, you're closer again.
Oh, what can I say? I'm a natural.
Based on a 2013 study, they estimate around 37.2 trillion cells. Which is kind of crazy, isn't it? That means there's 37 million little things inside you right now, probably more, working away to keep you alive and to make you function and to digest food and keep you breathing and to give you a consciousness, which I think is kind of exciting. And a little bit
And
scary.
one autistic guy with a microscope sifting through and counting them all.
Maybe in your brain.
They assigned Rain Man to the task.
Did you say it was 13.7 trillion?
37. 37.
Is that more than stars in the galaxies of the observable universe?
Ooh.
It's not.
I don't think so. Because there's like...
Yeah, I mean...
I want to say there's 100 billion... I misspoke in the last episode at one point. I said 100 billion stars. I meant to say galaxies, but it was just a Freudian slip. But there's over 100 billion galaxies, and each one of those has there's like over 100 billion stars. Some of them are like 300 billion. And I think that they found out that the size of the universe, we were off by like a factor of 10. So, multiply that times 10, I think.
Wow.
That's insane.
I don't know the exact number, but...
That's crazy.
These are just numbers I can't fathom.
It is insane, isn't it? And it puts me in awe because it's a number you can't fathom, but it's something you see every day, several times a day. If that makes sense, like in everyone you meet, in terms of cells, that is.
Yeah, no, that's... Yeah. I mean, because you can't see them, can you? So you see a single entity, and you just say, okay, that is Rachel. Yeah. But the science is telling us that actually you're looking at, trillions, 37 trillion or whatever it is, cells.
Yeah.
And
37 trillion pieces of Rachel.
37 pieces, yeah, exactly. And is
plus
it pieces
bacteria.
of Rachel? Because it's bacteria and it's different organisms. So I assume where you were going there is that because we're comprised of billions, trillions of organisms, how is it that it's not arbitrary, of course, but it seems arbitrary in that context to bunch them together and go, right, that's a person. It's a bit like grabbing a country and going, right, you see all of the people in the UK? Well, that's Rachel.
Yeah, it's true. And, you have to kind of wonder, at what point do you kind of cut off where a person exists? Like, if you cut off a limb, is that still part of you, or is that now just junk? Or, I don't know, how do you define it? Are you just a little bit of a smaller entity, or...
So I would say that is part of you, or at least it was, and it's still you. It's just where it's not connected to your to your body, but basically wherever you're conscious, that's kind of where we go. This person is Thomas because he's conscious. But then again, we do attribute names and identities to people when the consciousness is gone. In certain states. Yeah, it's a really interesting question.
If people are in comas and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so some of the most interesting philosophical questions is when you just start questioning things that are just so inherent that you may necessarily go your whole life without ever questioning them. And one of them is exactly the question that you just raised. It's good start. You've messed with my mind.
Sorry.
Don't apologize.
Okay. So we've established trillions of cells, and these are constantly replicating and others are dying off, so you're kind of changing all the time, right? And different cells have different lifespans, we know this. So, quiz time again. I promise this isn't going to go on for the whole hour. But I just think it's fun to test you. How long do you think these types of cells live for? Red blood cells.
125 days.
I'm gonna say 124 days.
You guys are actually pretty close. It's 4 months, which is, probably around 124 days.
Wow, yeah. Well, 126 days,
26?
Yeah, it's on the higher end, because I went one higher than Thomas, so yeah, we'll go with that.
I feel you guys are a little competitive.
So how many 32-day months are you including?
Oh, she didn't specify the month.
There's no 32-day months.
I can math me.
Can you math?
Yeah, many math.
Alright, in this case, how long does a white blood cell live?
Ooh.
I'm waiting for Thomas to guess.
I just figured you were Googling it.
No Googling here. I'm going to guess.
Since we can't see each other's webcams right now.
Yeah, that's true. We can get away with that. Let's say...
do white blood cells live longer or shorter than red?
I'm going to say it's
I honestly
something
have no
bizarre,
idea.
like 3 seconds.
No, well, because a lot of them, is this average? Like, because a lot of times after they attack a particular pathogen, don't they die off instantly? Or they die shortly after?
I think it depends on the type of white blood cell.
I really don't know that much about anatomy. I'm going to say 90 days.
Okay, it's actually a year.
Wow.
Oh, it's longer.
Yeah. Okay, one that is short-ish. Sperm cells.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you two might know about this.
7 days.
Yeah, like maybe half
5
a
to
week.
7 days.
Yeah, 3 days.
Yeah.
So pretty close there. That's good. And last one I was going to bring up was skin cells.
I reckon they die almost immediately.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest organ in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And...
dermis or epidermis?
Do they count as different organs?
I'm not sure. I just found skin cells on the paper, so...
Because if it's on the outside, they're getting hit. If you're out in the sun a lot, you're getting a lot of radiation. But I want to say about 7 years.
7 years?
Wow.
What? No. 2 to 3 weeks.
for internal, dermis.
2 to 3 weeks. Little bit off there.
2 to 3 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
Then what cells are live super long? I know brain cells live a long time.
Yeah.
But do you have inner fat cells or
honestly, I don't have the numbers for every type of cell.
That's why diets never work, is because the fat cells live longest.
This is where we quiz you back and we go, well, Rachel, how long does the average tooth cell last?
In me, 2 days with the amount of sugar on it. Oh, I have way too much of a sweet tooth. Anyway, so basically the point is cells are regenerating and dying off and so on. But brain cells, neurons, are a little bit different, as you mentioned, Thomas. Some scientists claim that some brain cells live throughout our entire lives, which means that all the stories you've heard about, cells being completely replaced every 7 years or 10 years, whatever the kind of myth is not exactly true, because our brain cells are essentially always there. It's just the pathways between them that change and adapt, and sometimes the connections kind of break, essentially, and sometimes stronger connections form, and so on. But there are extreme circumstances with the brain, like brain cells can die or be damaged, if we get a head injury or a spinal cord injury, and with diseases like Alzheimer's and Huntington's and Parkinson's, that can affect our brain cells and they can be damaged there. So, all this considered, the whole ship of Theseus paradox. Do you guys know that?
Where they swap all the parts out with another ship.
Yeah, basically. So it's all about whether an object, like a ship in this case, that has like all its physical components or pieces, once they're replaced, is it still the same ship? So like, how do you think this applies to the human body in terms of like all our cells regenerating? Do you think there's a point where we become entirely different people? Do you think our identity and what makes us us is based on our cells, on our brain cells, or on something completely separate, like the consciousness, which isn't necessarily a physical thing?
That's a really interesting question and a good analogy to draw with the ship. I've heard it with a car, where somebody was saying you replace the wheel. Oh, now you need to replace this. At what point do you say this isn't that car anymore? And for me, I think it really gets semantic, and it's about how you define what that car is, or what that ship is, or what that person is. Because if you define it as that entity there, that physiological entity right there, is Thomas or Rachel, and that switched over the course, at least 99% of it, or something ridiculous, because you said about some cells lasting basically your lifetime. Mm-hmm. But if most of them are replaced, then strictly speaking, with that definition, that's not that person anymore. You run into all sorts of problems, but really, although people don't define it this way, because it's such a bedrock, and it's such a thing that we don't really consider, that I think people just work with a colloquial definition that they never really think of. We use it to identify just a person, like a consciousness almost, like this is that person. So the fact that the cells change, it's still the person, even if it all gets replaced, essentially, because that is still how we define that thing. So yeah, for me personally, I think it gets tied into semantics pretty much entirely.
Well, I know I'm certainly not the same person I was 7 years ago. You know, my values change, my body's has changed, my, likes and dislikes, even things like, whatever you're allergic to, your allergies changed, your taste in food changes, your habits change. I'm like, I find that I'm very much a different person than I was 7 years ago, but I think it kind of falls into the trap of, as humans, we're so used to thinking in terms of black and white, and either you are this or you aren't, rather than a gradient or a scale where it's like maybe I'm 10% similar to how I was 7 years ago, maybe I'm 50% similar, maybe I'm 90% similar. And when we start thinking of it more along a gradient and a gradual change, then it's like you don't necessarily have to be 100% the same person, but you have shared experiences, you have shared memories with old you have certain things that you come to like and develop a fond affection for, and come to dislike based off of those memories.
Just to jump on the language that you used there, really interesting. You said you have memories like the old you, so you're referring to an old version of yourself, which implies that you don't think you are that old person anymore. Which we say things like this in conversation all the time, but it's not in the context of the fact that physiologically you are a different person. So when you say it like that, are you just saying it as a normal, just a normal kind of conversation, or are you saying that in the context of your of all of the atoms that comprise you now being different to what they was before?
Well, yeah, I think that the atoms are different, but also the way that the atoms are structured are different. Because, if let's say that you take a bunch of Lego blocks and you build one structure, you can take the exact same blocks and build something completely different, and you can't call them the same thing. Your brain cells, like Rachel was saying, they'll resituate themselves or reorganize themselves, or even if you have some of the same exact atoms inside of you, you're probably breathing in some of the same oxygen that was breathed by, Napoleon or something, just because it's scattered so much throughout, throughout our planet. But that doesn't mean that you are Napoleon, because it's completely, reorganized, and there's different chemical bonds that have formed, and it's used in different processes. Yeah, and so I think, some of me is the same, but I am a different person than I was 7 years ago. I share memories. But aside from that, it's like the old me kind of screwed over new me a lot, because we think of in terms of right now. Like, this makes me feel good. I like ice cream now. I don't care what I'm going to look like tomorrow or 10 weeks from now. You know, so we kick back and we want to watch Netflix and we want to enjoy ourselves. And oftentimes to the detriment of future us, because future us kind of is a different person.
That's true. Just picking up on what you said there, like, even if all the cells change, you still have your memories. So what if someone gets short or long-term memory loss and they can't remember a thing from their past, and then, you know, the 7-10 years pass and all of your cells have changed except your brain cells, which have been damaged? Are you still the same person if you can't remember?
See, yeah, this is very, very interesting, and it reminds me of what we spoke about. I think we spoke about in a previous episode, Phileas Gage.
Yes.
Because he's a great example of somebody that, of course, you know, like every day, every second, cells they're churning, they're turning from one cell to another, etc., and new ones are being made. But he, basically, to just give the story short again, he worked. Was it? He worked as a miner, I think it was.
It was on the railroads.
On the railroads.
Yeah.
But there was some form of explosion, and he ended up getting impaled through the head. And it went through certain parts of his brain, and he changed fundamentally as a person. So there we have an example of somebody that he hasn't went through a tremendous amount of time to change, you know, all of the atoms that comprise him, etc. But he did just have one action that hit one part of his physical identity, and it radically changed everything that you would use to describe him. You were saying that he changed in like what he had preferences for in food and who he liked to hang out with and what his interests were and his values. You know, it completely changed the person. So that ties in well with the question that you asked.
There was a similar example. I think it was in around 2001. I could be off by a couple of years, but there was a guy he was a family man, great guy, and all of a sudden he started developing an attraction for minors. And he started acting out in complete different ways than he had ever acted his entire life. And then they discovered that there was a brain tumor pressing against his brain. And at first, you know, scientists weren't sure if the brain tumor was causing that or whatever. But as soon as they removed the tumor, the impulses completely disappeared and he went back to normal. And then the impulses returned and they're like, okay, what's going on? They took him in for another scan. The tumor came back in the exact same spot. So if things like that, you know, pressing on your brain or, you know, having damage to your brain can cause you to behave or act completely outside of character, then, you know, it makes you kind of wonder what is it? So are we that fragile? Is our identity that fragile? Is it purely natural? Is it purely, you know, based in the natural world? Or, you know, is there some type of mind-body dualism like Rene Descartes put forth, where you have some type of soul that's acting on the present world? And I don't see any evidence for that, but I'm not sure if you were going to touch on that at all, Rachel.
Kind of a little bit. So one of the big things that I was going to bring up next is this idea of when we're kind of like defining our identities to other people, or other people are defining who they think we are. Where do we draw the line between like objective fact and kind of subjective opinion? So, like, say you're describing me. You guys might look at me and say, oh, well, she's a brunette. Whereas I might say, I'm naturally a blonde who dyes my hair. Genetically, I'm blonde. That is an objective fact. Mm-hmm. But to you guys, just looking at me, kind of subjectively, I'm a brunette. I guess you could kind of say the same thing with trans people. They identify... Say someone is born genetically as a man, mm-hmm. and they have XY chromosomes. Genetically, objectively, they have male DNA. But if they identify as women, if they choose to present as women, if they feel like women, then you could say they're women. But where do you draw that line when you're like defining an identity?
Yeah, so let's just say,
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it's again a really interesting topic. So if I meet you for the first time and I see the colour of your hair and it's brunette,
yeah,
and I know nothing else about you and we part ways, if I was to say to somebody else that, oh, she's a brunette, I'm just stating a fact, that I can't necessarily verify it then and there, but it's just a fact. Whereas if I say she's naturally a brunette, then I'm making an argument that I don't have the evidence to support, so I'm just mistaken. So when somebody sees, for example, a male, and we'll just assume it's a male, and statistically it's likely that he, is into females and, whatnot. These assumptions can be made, but to assert them, I think that's just human error. That's just humans being what they do. It's very interesting to touch on the topic of physiologically somebody is completely a male, but in their mind they see themselves as a female. That's a very interesting perspective on exactly how identity works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to me because when we talk about science, like in the first episode, we talked about the scientific method and, the importance of objective evidence and things being factual and you being able to, double check these things and, get repeat experiments and stuff. And if you look at a trans woman and you check their DNA, you're constantly going to see male DNA, but that doesn't make them a male if they don't identify that way.
So to me, they are a male. Like, there's no two ways about it. I'm very much with the Jordan Peterson situation. It's one of the only things I agree with him on, in that if you're a male, you're a male, you're a female, you're a female. At least, in my opinion, that's just the way it works. But very interesting with the identity part. With what we have in science so far, when we can look at, sit somebody down in, what's the machines they use to product your brain, basically, to see brain activity. They went from my mind.
Like MRIs or CT.
Yeah, totally. We have rudimentary equipment, like neuroscience. We're just babies. We're in the infancy, essentially. But we can, we can test the cells and see that there's, I presume you can tell that certain cells are male, etc. And that you can do the same when you're looking at brain activity. It wouldn't surprise me if people that do identify as the opposite sex, they do have different brain. There is objective evidence to be seen in the brain, but before we had these capacities to even verify these things through scans, etc., and even knowing what cells are, let alone being able to test them for anything, you're in a situation where you'd have somebody that completely identifies as something that isn't accurately represented by their material presence, and no way of being able to convey that objectively because of the absence of understanding. It must be very, very difficult. And
in my final year of uni, actually, I read a paper about they were looking at the differences between like male and female brains and how, in general, as a trend, men had a larger brain volume. But women had a larger brain surface area. And they hypothesized that this was just one of the things that led to, in general, men being a little bit more analytical and women being a little bit more emotional.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to know, if we repeat that test with trans people, what will we see?
I'm going to bet that you'll get different things. One example I can give you is that it's fascinating. Like when they look at one thing on the brain thing. They've looked at a lot of tests on chess geniuses, essentially. And anyone that's a grandmaster in chess, they are a genius. They're brilliant. And they find that they have smaller brains than the average person, which is quite surprising. But now they realize, or this is the current hypothesis, it is that the smaller brain, the more compact, is actually a good thing because it means the information has less to travel across on the neurons, etc. Which is really interesting. But one thing they found a lot in the females is that they have male brains a lot of the time. It doesn't necessarily translate to their sexual preferences, etc. But there is definite things that they can find in there to go, it is more male. But maybe that's the wrong term to use, saying it's more male. But all I'm saying there is that it's found more often in male. Really.
So you're trying to say that, like, in those women, you're seeing a pattern that is usually more consistent in male brains?
Yeah, so if you look at male and female bodies, females tend to, they develop breasts, and males, obviously, penis, etc. But also the sexual dimorphism in humans is quite big. Males can put on muscle quicker, they tend to be bigger, they're higher in height, there's definite physical differences. so far as the evidence I've seen, there is definite physical differences in the brain, which explains a lot of things. Females tend to be more religious. Now, this is probably, or it's been linked to, the emotional part in the brain. They also tend to be more caring towards animals. Much more females are vegan than male. And that's almost certainly got something to do with the capacity for altruism, empathy, something that would have been selected for during our evolutionary process. And this just ties in so much to, defining who you are as an individual. And the more research you do, the more you recognize that actually this was determined by things I didn't control, etc. I don't know if you want to go into this topic within this conversation, but in my opinion, the evidence is so overwhelming that I would say there's no such thing as free will because of that case. But yeah.
I kind of wanted to dive in on a couple of those thoughts. The first thing, you were talking about, chess grandmasters, and like one of the things is like with any skill set, you don't start off that way. You don't start off as a chess grandmaster. Like this is kind of the difference between a fixed and growth mindset. And what they'll show is like as people are progressing from amateur to grandmaster, the particular cells, the particular brain cells that they're using, the connections become myelinated. And it's this myelin that speeds up the transfer rates of information, the chemical reactions that allow them to see things. But they also, the way that those cells are structured changes. And so like when a grand chess master stares at a board, they're instantly making a determination rather than sitting there and analyzing it, because they're able to quickly discard useless facts because they've seen so many similar layouts. And oftentimes that allows them to memorize dozens of different boards at a time and play chess games completely in their head. But if then you take them and you put them in a different scenario where you switch up all the board pieces to a layout that they've never ever seen, that would never actually happen in an actual chess game, like put all the pawns on the right side or some like weird layout, then it's almost impossible for them to memorize that board positioning because it's completely foreign to them. It's not that their memories are amazing. They've just learned to pick up certain cues from lots and lots of exposure.
A good example just to throw in there is that there's a reason why if you want to learn multiple languages, it's best to do it as a child. Your brain's more moldable, and so being exposed to that. So if somebody notices that you're good at chess and they put you in the presence of being trained at chess and you do enjoy it, etc., then it's going to make sure the wiring for your brain goes that way. But there has to be something said, and that is there are people that are born and they are just really, really smart and they're really good at certain things. If you take, for example, the current chess master is Magnus Carlsen, and you can look at quite a few chess masters with this case. They were speaking like fluently by the age of 2, like very, very fluently. There's something was very much is going on in the brain, in the sense that they're just very talented, gifted in those areas. And it's not just one area, like somebody that can talk fluently at 2. Somebody, I think Magnus Carlsen beat the world champion at like age 11 or something like that. 13, I think it was. That's insane. And this can't just be put down to skill. This has to be put down to the physiology that he just was lucky to be given.
This actually kind of brings me on perfectly to my next point, so good job, guys. But basically, there's this fantastic book by a neuroscientist, and I hope I can pronounce his name, but it's like Joseph Ledoux or Ledoux, or I think it's French. And he wrote this wonderful book called Synaptic Self, which I think I talk about a little bit too much on my channel because it's wonderful. But to summarize quite a long book into a very, very short summary, he basically reckons that in human beings, we can trace back everything to our personalities and our identities and who we are. We can trace it all back to what's going on in the brain and what connections there are between neurons, how many connections there are, what chemicals are released at what times, and so on. And he thinks that this is influenced by a mix of nature and nurture, but that how, if you want to put it very simply, how our brain is wired directly affects who we are as people. So from this, I kind of want to ask the question, if we are who we are because of essentially wiring in our brain, if we could create an exact replica of that brain, whether it be an actual physical clone, or if we could map it onto a computer and create some kind of like artificial brain, would that be you? That kind of clone? Could you call that you, or would that be a different entity, or at what point would it split? Or what do you think? Did I make that clear enough?
Yeah, totally. Do you want to go first? I'll keep jumping in, Thomas. Or if you want, I can answer.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's similar to I forget what book this originated in, but the experiment where like you teleport yourself to another planet just by transferring the information, print out an exact clone of you, and then destroy the original. And if it all happens instantaneously, the new you appears on the other side with all of the memories of past you up to the point where that you hopped in the machine to teleport. They feel like they're the same person. They feel like they're identical because all their cells are, exactly laid out the same. But, I think most people would argue, oh no, that's not exactly the same person. And people would be protesting and rioting against teleportation if that's the technique that was used. So I don't know, there's kind of a gut reaction where like I wouldn't want to be killed even if I know that there's an exact copy of me that exists somewhere else.
Is that just humans being too sentimental, or what do you think?
That's interesting. I think that's like a second question though, because to the first one, I really think it just depends on definitions. If I'm defined in a way which means that the atoms that comprise me is what matter, that is me. And in the teleportation example, where all the atoms get moved across, I think that's what you said. That's still me. But if one where it's a copy that's completely the same, philosophically, there's not a difference. But because somebody's identified that collection of atoms as me, then no, that isn't technically me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, you think of it in terms of like, let's say that you have a particular video on your computer that's extremely sentimental, and it's from your wedding or somebody's funeral or something. And you take that and you copy it up into the cloud, and then your flash drive gets completely destroyed and your computer gets destroyed, but you still have that copy of it. It makes no difference to you where it resides. It's more the information and the emotion that's associated with it. And if all of a sudden we start thinking of people in terms of information and, someone who shares memories and shares, experiences, and if all of that is preserved in the cloud or in a robot or somewhere else where you can constantly go and share a laugh and share a memory with them, or share their experiences or, their knowledge. If Einstein's you're able to log in to Google and chat with Einstein about relativity, then is that, what's been lost? The physical manifestation of those thoughts, of those ideas, of that information? Because the information is still there.
Yeah, so that's, to me, like if I want to refer to, say, Rachel is her consciousness. So if her consciousness can be preserved through technological advancements, such as they can somehow upload her consciousness to a computer, then to me, that's Rachel. The body is not Rachel.
Well, and are we even talking with Rachel right now? Because what we're hearing, I'm staring at my computer. I'm not staring at Rachel. I'm not staring at you. I'm staring at a MacBook. What I'm getting is a bunch of bits, a bunch of ones and zeros that have been translated from an analog signal of you talking into a microphone and then transferred down a wire to me, and then, my computer interprets it as sound, and that's what I hear. But I'm not actually hearing your voice. I'm not hearing Rachel's voice. I'm hearing audio waves that my computer generates.
So me personally, I think there's a couple of things conflated there, because you're absolutely right when you say you're not hearing her voice. What you're hearing is, a generated version of her voice that's being transferred and recoded and translated, etc. But because I define somebody as their consciousness, you are having a conversation with me and Rachel, and it doesn't matter that there's these manifestations of different atoms and ones and zeros in order for us to be able to communicate. If it's defined that way, I'm sure you'll agree, then you are talking to me, you are talking to Rachel. But if it's defined another way, yeah, it's very, very peculiar.
It definitely makes you think about it, because we're affecting each other's memories. We're affecting each other's conscious state right now. This conversation is having an impact on you, and it's me doing something that triggers that change. The same audio waves that I'm forming, a copy of them is being generated, and you're hearing it on the other end, or it's being encoded and transferred at the speed of light. And so it seems almost instantaneous, but even still, it's a very odd dynamic. It's a very, I'm not hearing the actual physical sound waves that are coming out of your mouth. And so, if that's the case, then is it really that much different to take someone's entire consciousness and upload it to a computer, and then have that consciousness come up with the same thoughts and spit them back to me that are then, processed through a computer and come out the other end? Would that be me talking to you if your physical body died?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, for me, if the consciousness is you and you manage to upload that, then yeah, you're talking to that person still. I mean, this also brings up
if you can do that, and if then you have like a 3D printer that has you can print as many versions of that person out. Let's say you can print human biomass and recreate a person. Then if I create 5 or 6 copies of you, are those all you? And then
No.
would it then be a crime if you lose the physical copies? Would it be considered murder to delete someone's consciousness if it's a file in a computer?
Yeah.
So like I go through and oops, I just deleted the president.
Yeah.
Or I just sent him in an email to everyone, and that was a top secret military person who was encrypted. And
so this is a great opportunity just for me to bring this up, and that is I completely accept Sam Harris's moral landscape. So I think morality is objective, but the way I would change what he has slightly, and I understand it seems incredibly arrogant to want to change some of Sam Harris's work, but he says conscious creatures or sentient creatures, but I would say sentient entities for this very reason, because I don't care if it's an organism, I don't care if it's a creature, I care if it has the capacity to experience various states of well-being, pain and pleasure, then morality absolutely gets involved. So if you're able to upload a consciousness to a computer, let alone duplicate it, for me, there's really, really big moral considerations happening at that point. But I know that I'm, at the moment at least, at this day and age, I am a minority in thinking this. I've met many people that would say, no, it's up to you what you do with a copy of someone else.
Well, but here's a question too, because there's one lady who I forget the name of this case study, but she lost her ability to experience fear, completely lost it. And so like someone came up to her in a park to rob her, stuck a gun in her face, and she just kind of chuckled and kept walking. And just absolutely complete disregard for anything that would trigger fear in every other sane person. Mm-hmm. And so all of our emotions are chemical. If you take away someone's dopamine receptors, or you prevent them from being able to experience oxytocin or serotonin or norepinephrine or any number of chemicals that we release, then they're not going to be able to have the emotions that are associated with that. So if you duplicate all of the memories, but you don't have any emotional responses, you don't have any chemicals that release, that you're not able to duplicate the emotional feelings, then are you actually going to have a copy of the person or just a copy of the memories?
Yeah.
Because so much of our personality is based in emotion.
So that's a really interesting point. So I guess you could kind of take it a step further and say it's only kind of an actual person when, I guess, the identity or the consciousness or the brain or whatever, like, can develop. So if you take an exact copy of someone's, like, mind and you put it into, like a biological organism that can live and breathe and move and whatever, at that point it's not just gonna have the memories from the past and the thoughts from the past and all that stuff. It's gonna start developing and changing and creating new memories and learning new things. So I guess, at what point is it no longer a copy and it becomes like a new entity?
Can it not always be both? Because if you copy someone, even if you copied me right now and you put one of me in a war zone, and you left one of me here to do what I'm doing as a living and living the life that I am, within 1 week, we would be different people. Not massively so, but experiences, certain...
But that's what happens with twins. They start off genetically identical, or at least identical twins do. And from the moment they're born, they're technically exposed to different things, so they become different people. But just because they were genetically identical in the beginning, does that mean they were once the same person?
But so they were, for all intent and purposes, a duplication. I mean, they weren't perfect, because you do have mutations, even among twins. But so far as I know, I should just caveat that. So far as I know, it's not a perfect copy. And then, of course, you've got epigenetics, and then you get into the exposure of the environment. And, you know, even when they're twins, it's how much they're exposed to certain things. But what you've raised with the duplicating somebody, it's just like a perfect version of the twins, in the sense that it is absolutely the same, apart from they're now going to experience different things. And as we know, you know, biology and nature and nurture are the two factors here, and both of them have massive effects on who we are. To people like me who don't believe in free will, they are completely what comprises us. And being exposed to different things does make you a different person, but the fact would still remain that you was a copy of the other person. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, it's like if you have, you know, 2 iPhone 8s, and, you know, they're identical at the time of creation, but then they go to different locations and have all this, you know, different pictures, different software, all this stuff. They're going to be different. I think of it kind of in terms of like programming. If you've ever used GitHub, it's an online code repository where people can kind of upload their code and share it with other people, and others can come along and basically take what you start with and then kind of create a fork of that code, where it's like, all right, this is this instance, you know, version, whatever, 1.0, whatever, beta. And then they come along and they're like, all right, I like what you have right here. I don't want to alter the original. So I'm going to kind of make a copy, a fork that branches out. And then I'm going to, you know, code my version of it over here. But they all kind of come from the same origins. So you could have Steven, you know, 2 Steven 1.0s that then, you know, one goes off to Iraq and the other goes to South America. And when they come back, they still have that base level similarity, but they're very different they're very different people over the course of those experiences.
All right, I'm kind of conscious of time at the minute, so I just want to zoom forward a little bit and talk about how our identities are kind of influenced by society and the people around us and the world around us. So this is slightly changing the topic a bit. But you know how at the beginning of this episode I asked how you two would describe yourselves? If I asked you how your girlfriends would describe you, what would you say?
I'd say, how dare you assume my sexuality? No. I would, it depends on the time of the month. There goes.
Sure, you don't want me to cut that bit out?
No, you keep that in. I'm sure people will know I'm being lighthearted, or am I? But the point is actually, that's a great fact to come into. There are different hormones released, you know, at a certain time of the month for half the human race. This isn't something they choose, but it does dramatically change their attitudes to certain things. Not all in all cases, but you can see that it does, you know, block serotonin or, you know, release certain things, and that's interesting because it changes that person, and that's a completely physical thing that's not in their control at all. Of course, there's similar ones for males.
Not even that. Eating, you know, just if you go without eating for a day and you get, you know, angry.
I mean, absolutely, like everything gets involved, you know.
Sleep,
you know, if you get sleep is massive, so I'm genuinely a happy person, and exercise huge, but if I lack sleep and exercise, I can get very irritable, and I've figured that out, and so I can fix that now. But that's just basically getting a synergy with me as a consciousness, all the time, good sir, every day. No, it's good fun. I don't know what my girlfriend would describe, and I think it would depend on many things. Is she tired? Is she hungry? She gets hangry.
Well, my next question was going to be, how would her description of you differ from how your mum described you?
I take it my mum wouldn't say good in bed.
I hope not. But this does lead me on to the next point. It's about how we kind of have different hats that we put on when we're around different people or in different situations. We essentially have different identities or different selves, and we act differently around different people. Like, generally, as a person, I'm overly anxious about everything. I'm very introverted. I get very emotional. But the minute I have to make a YouTube video, I have to push all that aside. I have to, like, bring out my creative side. I have to be energetic and optimistic and at least pretend to be confident. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job properly. So the idea that I'm trying to get at is, depending on the situation we're in, the people we're around, the people we're interacting with, we have very different identities and we become very different people.
You've got me thinking, actually, and you know, for example, you're looking at your laptop now, or you're looking at, it could be anything, and it's got certain colours and it's got certain attributes. It doesn't. It's just your perception of it is telling you that's the way to digest this information. You know, nothing's got colour. It kind of, you know, I think technically, I don't know if that's the case, but it's about whether or not it absorbs light.
Yeah,
so, but you see it, you know, like you'd see me, you'd just say that he's a brunette. And while that is a fact and it's a way of describing me, it's also not. But the point being is that you generate a perception of somebody. So if somebody was to ask you, who is Steve, you have a perception of me. But so does everybody else, and it's always different, at least slightly. Like, some things are always going to be the same, or very likely to be the same. And I guess because you were saying about how you have to express yourself differently in different environments, you're going to be giving more and more different impressions to different people. So in one way, you're not just you are thousands of you in different people's minds.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of it is down to kind of what we expect of people as well. So people always say I talk too much about Dan, but to use Dan as an example, like, when I think of him as a very kind, loving person, very generous, very kind of like fun and silly. He'd probably describe himself as just being very laid back and chill and doesn't really like care too much about anything. Like, he doesn't let himself get too wound up about anything. Whereas you ask his mum who he is, and his mum's like, oh, Dan's such a spiritual person and he's this and this. And then Dan's like, oh no, I think I'm really logical. And it's because his mum has, because his mum is quite a spiritual person, she kind of projects that onto Dan. Whereas, because I see him like at his most relaxed when he's just kind of like laid back, not doing much. Like, I do see him as this kind of rational but kind, loving person. So, because of the situations we're in, and because of what I expect to see from him and what she expects to see from him and what he expects to see from himself, we all kind of have different ideas of who this same entity is. So it's a bit like,
and he controls that to some extent.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like when you hang out with your high school friends from, years earlier, and all of a sudden you find yourself kind of shifting into these former roles and acting the way that you used to around them. And then it's kind of weird when suddenly you introduce them to other friends and family members, and it's like, you're like, which role am I supposed to play? Like, how do I... And it's... Yeah. That's not just me.
No, it's not. No, it's a good point. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't, see anyone I went to school with anymore, but it's kind of the same whenever, I take Dan to my parents' house, or whenever I go spend time at my brother and sister-in-law's house. And, I have this idea in my head of what my brother should be. But as a husband, he's a very different person. And as a father to his son, he's a very different person from the brother I grew up with. So it kind of takes some adjusting to be like, wait, no, he is a responsible adult. No,
that's actually... My granddad, to me, was a very kind and gentle person. And he was. But he was just very chilled and relaxed and very granddaddy. But when I started getting into motorbikes and I hung out with him and his biking crew, the guy's a complete rebel, and it's not in a legal way, but he was in a really funny way. and my perception changed.
He had a Confederate
Well, this
flag.
is like we don't do that in the UK. No, he actually
You just
yeah, we
Brexit.
did
So he was part
Brexit.
of the BNP.
He was brilliant. Yeah, it was good stuff. Yeah, he was just beating people up. I was like, "Oh, Grandad, what the hell?" Eh? No, he. But what you were just saying about how you get like a conflict of two personalities that you are to different people. At first, he was very much like trying to be my granddad while trying to be his mate, what he is to his mates. And then, of course, what won out was his mates. And then we developed a cool relationship in the sense that I knew a part of him that even his wife knew, but didn't really get exposed too much.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting example of you presenting yourself in different ways and the world receiving it in different ways because of that. So, yeah.
Well, this links a lot to, like social identity theory. I don't know if you've heard of it, but Tajfel and Turner came up with it in the 70s to describe how we see people and kind of group them together, and we become part of social groups, whether that's to do with shared interests or even race or gender or social class or something like that. And it gives us this sense of belonging and identity. And we tend to kind of pick up parts of our identity from other people in the same in-group as us, if that makes sense. And then we start to look at people in out-groups, and we start to kind of look at them negatively in order to boost our own self-esteem a bit.
So we're just like internally very much tribal.
Yeah, pretty much. And often it's a natural thing that we don't always notice we're doing, like it's very implicit. So we might not even be aware that we feel a part of one group and kind of think negatively of out-group members. We might not even realise that, but it's still constantly forming our identity. So like, I guess us three together, we'd probably all describe ourselves as YouTubers, and we're part of this group of YouTube content creators. And whether we notice it or not, that has some pretty big connotations. So we probably, without realising it, make judgments about people who aren't YouTubers, and people who aren't YouTubers probably make judgments about us when they find out we are YouTubers, if that makes sense. I was just trying to find something we all have in common.
Yeah, I mean, we evolved to be
I'm
tribally.
normally cool with them as long as they like and subscribe.
I think when it comes to YouTube, one thing that non-YouTubers seem to forget is that it's real people that make these channels. So all of the heavy insults and threats and stuff, it's like, you're talking to a person. Just calm down. Yeah.
But still, it's something that makes up part of your identity.
Yeah.
And whether you realise it or not, you probably you probably feel like you have certain traits because you're a YouTuber, and you probably pick up other things from other YouTubers. And am I making sense here with the whole in-group out-group thing?
No, you are, because we've evolved to be a social species, and so tribalism is very much a thing. And so now that it can't express itself in its natural state, in the state of nature, where it is very like it's us and them, and it could be defined on very basic things. And now that we finally are starting to get to an age where we're getting over certain prejudices, such as racism, sexism. I would add speciesism into that, but we're not over that.
Homophobia.
Yeah, homophobia, etc. It's just natural, so it's not a surprise for us to be in a state where, even when it comes to just, there was a massive thing where people were either buying the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox 360, and there was just this huge war, and there was major regression in it. You see it with football teams, especially with sports.
Android,
Apple, yeah,
Microsoft, Windows versus
Mac. Like, so if you look at the world and you see people just being irrationally tribalistic and just irrational in general, just know that we evolved to be this stupid.
Well, I think there's kind of a plus side to it too, and that's that while on the one hand humans are extremely tribalistic, we also have expanded our circle of in-group to, if you've ever heard of Peter Singer and his idea of the expanding circle, where we do have tribes and stuff, but we've kind of expanded beyond the point of just like our tribe to like our little feudal lord and whatnot, to nation states, to the world as a whole. the human race, and that's kind of expanding now to include the animal kingdom and trying to take care of nature and preserve our planet. And that gives me a little bit of hope. I think that we still have, our brains haven't evolved much to push beyond the tribalism that might be our undoing. We might end up starting a nuclear war with Rocket Man, but it gives me a little bit of hope to see that culturally we're evolving to realize that, hey, our circle might be a little bit bigger than we ever thought possible.
See, there's just a thing that I wanted to point out, and this genuinely scares me. Now that we're in a state where we are at large in control of nature, natural selection is no longer putting pressure on us to evolve in a certain way. So, for example, we're not going to get physiologically more intelligent. It's just not going to happen because there's not a pressure to do that. If you're dumb, you've got just as much likelihood of surviving and reproducing as somebody that's a natural born chess master, etc.
Unless SpaceX has like an IQ test limit for their Mars colony.
Yeah, unless they say, honestly, and it shouldn't happen because it's against human rights, but unless something like you can only reproduce if you're in the top 10% of intelligent people, evolution, we're not going to evolve smarter, but culturally and understanding how education is manifested into people, etc., that is improving, and it is improving tremendously. If you look at how much IQ has improved over the last century, it's mental. It's by like 30 points or something. Now, we haven't changed.
Well, but Stephen,
yeah, go on.
I think that as we're developing methods like CRISPR and various gene editing techniques to allow us to go into, the particular sex cells and modify them, once we know exactly what every single tiny little thing does and find ways to alter them, I don't know, we might live in a future society similar to Gattaca where everyone is perfectly genetically engineered for their environment, or maybe we become merged with some type of highly advanced technology where the computers augment our intelligence.
Yeah.
So it might not be natural selection that pushes evolution from this point, but I think it's a little premature to say that evolution is
No. Don't get me wrong. I would not say, if that's the way it came out, I retract that. I'm not saying that evolution is over. It very much is the case. But it's always about the selective forces in nature. So you get people that go, "Oh, we're going to lose our little finger over several thousands of years or millions of years or whatever they define it as." That's just bollocks. It's not going to happen. That's not how evolution works. It has to be affecting them negatively, stopping them from having the capacity to reproduce. That's the only way it happens with natural selection. So the snake didn't lose its legs because it didn't want them, or because it wasn't using them to scratch its ear. It lost it because it got in the way while it was burrowing, so it couldn't get to food and it couldn't survive enough to reproduce. Like, it's harsh. It's really harsh, but that's just the way it works. So
or because it increased another
totally
chance of reproducing.
Of course. My point being is that there has to be a natural process. It doesn't actually have to be natural, to be fair. Like the artificial one that I gave is an example. But there has to be some kind of evolutionary pressure where the trait's being selected for, and that's not, intelligence isn't being selected for in the largest extent when it comes to Western civilization and the modern world in general. But you are right. If we are able to splice genes, essentially, then that is a way around it. But I would say that's not saying that we evolved for that point, unless you kind of use a different definition of evolved.
Can I make one caveat? So natural selection isn't the only form of evolution that we observe. Yeah. Another one is sex selection. And that's why you see like peacocks with giant feathers. And I do think that there is a certain level of bias towards or in favor of intelligence when it comes to sex selection.
There is. Natural selection is sometimes just defined as the natural process of basically who can survive. But it also does encompass sexual selection, etc.
That said, it always seems like it's the idiots and the rednecks that, while they might not be able to attract a mate quite as easily, once they have one, they don't exactly limit their reproductive
That's another thing. The more educated people are, and the more intelligent and the higher the IQ is, there is a definite trend of them reproducing less. So that's not a good sign for that hypothesis. there is definitely a sexual selection part to it. I mean, the point I was trying to represent is that it's not something that we're emphasizing like we did before. Go back 4 million years ago, where, you've got Homo habilis, Australopithecus afarensis, and, developing up to modern humans. There was massive selection on the brain, and the paleontological, losing my words, the evidence we found with geology, etc., very much shows that the brain case was expanding massively, and so the brain was obviously being selected for as in intelligence in that sense, whereas it's not so much now. But it's very interesting to think about the splicing that you said, because that would change it. That would mean that we are getting more intelligent, etc. It's just whether or not you would define that as evolution, because some people define anything as evolution because we are a natural organism, etc.
Well, evolution is just gradual change over time.
Yeah, so biological change over time. And, yeah.
I think it's premature too, because evolution happened on timescales of hundreds of thousands and millions and billions of years,
but not in all cases.
Modern human, the modern human civilizations that we know of are only several thousand years max.
There is some cases that have been very quick, though, haven't there? So most are over millions and millions of years, but there's some that's been, like within about 100 generations, there's been massive changes made because of just an enormous pressure that's been given. So sometimes it's very quick. I think they call it like rapid evolution or something.
Yeah, you often see that when animals are separated by like area or space or something, like lizards on different islands or things like that. So there's like, sorry, I'm full of cold and my brain is just going at this point. What is it called when they're separated by area?
Like a
like a geographic. I'm forgetting the term as well now.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Like isolation.
Yes, yeah. So that one of the ones we have seen over the last sort of like few hundred years is there was one species of lizard and they got split up over like 4 or 5 islands, and because the environmental conditions were different on each island, and they were interbreeding only on the island and couldn't meet with each other and mate between islands, there was a lot of pressure, and separate species of lizard developed very, very quickly, like you say, within a couple of hundred generations.
Yeah, that's it. It can be very, very quick, for sure.
Yeah.
But evolution is a very interesting point in the sense that it very much ties into the natural component, along with, because we've got the nurture, which is where we can put like society and what we're taught and our education with the nature, and nature obviously is almost entirely got something to do at least with evolution. And it's amazing how those two points together comprise who we are and how we identify ourselves. How would you describe yourself then, Rachel, considering the topic? Yeah.
Well, I think going back to the beginning, I would first describe myself as, I say, hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a Homo sapiens with 37 trillion cells. And
and a blonde.
I'm a secret blonde. Just don't look at my roots. I don't know. I think I definitely describe myself as full of cold right now. But also like a creative and a book lover and a photographer and a YouTuber. I definitely describe myself more by my interests than my personality for some reason. And I don't know, I think that says more about my self-esteem than anything else. But again, that's kind of part of my identity. I kind of think people are going to be more interested in things that I'm interested in rather than just who I naturally am. So...
Well, I think that also speaks to the whole tribalism that you mentioned earlier. It's like you're talking to people trying to find others in your in-group. So you're like, I'm a YouTuber. And they're like, oh, I love YouTube. Or like, I'm an author. Oh, I read a lot of books. And like, what type of books do you write? You're searching for, common interests and commonalities and overlap.
Yeah. No, that's true. I was at a party the other night and I met a guy and he asked me what I did. And I was like, oh, I'm a YouTuber. And he was like, what kind of YouTuber? And I was like, oh, I talk about like atheism and science and kind of like social issues. He's like, oh, thank God. I didn't expect that from you, but that sounds good. And I was like,
What did he think you were?
I don't know. I think he made me worried I was like some Logan Paul clone.
Yeah.
But he was just a bit like, oh, thank God you're one of those. And I was like, is that a good thing? Is this like some badge of honor now? I'm not quite sure.
If you think about how, I was just going to think, like when somebody says they're a YouTuber, it's so vast. It tells you nothing. It just tells you that they make videos, I guess, now I'm thinking about it. Because there's just so many different things you can do. You know, that he could have just assumed, okay, you do hair and makeup, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Or I'm going to bring over my collection of Kinder eggs for you to open.
Brilliant.
Well, I still might do that.
I still don't understand that. I will be trying to wrap my head around that for years to come. Why are there millions of people watching kids open Kinder eggs?
It's other kids, isn't it?
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, my brother even admits it. Sometimes he'll just like give his son, my nephew, the iPad with the YouTube Kids app and just, you know, sit him in front of it for half an hour while Warren has to do some work or something. And that's where all the views get racked up, because autoplay and...
Yeah, I've got a young family member. He's 6, and he knows very well how to function an iPad. And I went through his search history because I asked his mum first. I was like, I'm just genuinely interested, and most of it was Grand Theft Auto. So,
really?
Yeah, loads of it. Yeah, but I don't personally care about that. But it was just interesting. Like that's where he went. He went for a lot of that, and he looked at a lot of Peppa Pig and some SpongeBob SquarePants. Good choice.
To be honest, that pretty much covers my interest. GTA, Peppa Pig, cartoons in general. You know, I'm good. Yeah.
Good stuff.
I thought everyone in the UK just watched like Downton Abbey and Thomas the Tank Engine.
That too. Oh God, me and my sister watched the. Don't judge us. My sister's 39. We watched the Postman Pat film this weekend. It was surprisingly really good and really bad at the same time.
No, we're not judging, but everybody listening, they will, you know, because they're tribalistic mammals like me and you, and so they're going to judge you. So
now I'm part of everyone's out group.
Yes.
It's amazing how quickly people can become a part of an out group. It's like, oh yeah, we have everything in common, this. Oh, you don't like that? You're dead to me.
Yeah, totally. Like, I think the most you see that in is religion. You're just like, oh, what, you don't choose to believe this as well? Or this makes no sense to you. Well, I don't want to associate with you anymore. Good day, sir.
Or politics, too.
Yeah,
way.
Man.
It's like,
the politics with Brexit have just been disgusting.
Oh, God.
Disgusting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're a liberal. You like this, that, and this, that, and the other, and you believe in, you know, freedom of whatever. Oh, but you like guns?
No, it's actually been worse than that. It's mainly, actually, from what I've seen, is Remainers just labelling anybody and everybody that was on the Leave side a racist and a bigot. There's just such an example of just listen to them, talk to them, don't just outgroup them like this. And
I'll be honest, I have been a little bit judgmental of Leavers, but only because everyone I've spoken to who voted Leave was like, oh, well, I didn't really understand it, so I just thought, you know, a change would be good.
So I've actually had the opposite, which is quite interesting.
Think of that.
Yeah, so I voted Leave.
Yeah. Oh, really?
I think I could put a very good argument for it. Most people assume immediately that I'm, you know, I would have voted Remain, but I didn't. I had good reasons to do so. We
voted Leave back in 76.
Yeah, you did, exactly. But what is very surprising for me is that so many people that I very much get on with, and they're very smart and they're very rational and they're not, you know, derogatory for no reason. When it comes to Brexit, they have been remarkably divisive, like so disappointingly so. It's been terrible.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely terrible. I've lost friends over it.
I
only bring this up as an example for the out-group group thing. I see it very much in that situation. And it's a particularly bad one because it's a 50-50 kind of thing. So it's crazy. Yeah.
Here's a question to kind of bring us back on topic. But Steve, if you vote Leave and then a month later you read a bunch of stuff and you're like, oh my God, I was wrong about this, that, and the other, and suddenly you completely change your mind and perspective on this. Are you then the same person that you were a month ago?
Am I the same person? Again, it's all like definitional based. Like if you say the same person as in, are you still your consciousness? You've just been exposed to new arguments and new situations, then yes. But if you say, if you define me, like that same person, as the memories, the nurture, the natural, all of it together was what comprised who I was, then a millisecond afterwards, I'm no longer that person. So when talking just in a conversation, of course I'm the same person. It's just I would have been exposed to new things that changed my mind. Or
what do you mean when you say your consciousness? Because
it's
it's not like a steady stream of consciousness. You could say, what if every time I fall asleep and then I wake up the next day, I'm a completely new
It's a really
person.
good question, and I like defining consciousness. You can do it in a really basic way, but it doesn't capture like certain caveats, and then you can be like really philosophical with it, and it just puts everybody to sleep. But basically, when we're not thinking about the topic like we are now, where you're just looking at me and you're not thinking, wow, I'm not really speaking to you. This is a translation of ones and zeros. And you know what? Everything I'm seeing in his eye actually isn't his eye. It's a vast amount of organisms and atoms that are working together in order to allow him to have aperture to look at me, etc. Because we don't think in that way in most situations, we just see that individual and we go, that individual, the way that person interacts with me, the way that person is dressed, etc. You kind of it seems to be the consciousness is how you would label that, the crux of that person, if you see what I mean. Not the crutch, but the crux. But it is loosely defined, and really, I'd have to go away and nail it down, and then come back at you and go, I can't define consciousness, Thomas, help me. Yeah.
Well, hey, you wouldn't be the first one to try and
No,
fail.
I wouldn't. It is such a...
And then we could do entire episodes on, the soft and hard problems of consciousness.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And I'm sure we probably will.
Yeah, that's true. But with that, I think we should wrap up this episode because it's quite long. Next week, we will be talking about how to test if the Earth is flat. So if you're interested in finding out about flat Earth, globe Earth, which one is right, I think there's an obvious answer. You can join us next week. But for now, I have been Rachel Oates. You can find me on YouTube at Rachel Oates. Be sure to check out Stephen on YouTube under the name Rationality Rules and Thomas as Holy Kool-Aid. They're both really cool channels. I really like them. You can also let us know what you thought of this episode and every other episode on our website, thehereandhow.com, at facebook.com/thehereandhow, or you can follow us or let us know what you think on Twitter or Instagram at thehereandhow. But for now, thank you so much for listening.
This has been an absolute blast, and now we want you to join in the conversation over on the Here and How Facebook and Twitter pages, or follow us on Pinterest and Instagram if you just want some of the dankest of sciencey memes. If you like one of our particular styles, check out each of our YouTube channels: Rachel Oates, Rationality Rules by Stephen Woodford, and Holy Kool-Aid by me, Thomas Westbrook. To find all of our episodes, show notes, contact information, and more, warp on over to our home base, thehereandhow.com. If you enjoyed this episode and want us to succeed in spreading the love of science, you can help us out by giving us a 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. And to all our friends and family listening, thank you for spending this episode with us. We'll be back to explore another exciting big idea next week. Now go create something magnificent.